Your son, Hunter. Let's make that the issue. Why don't we make that the issue? Because seriously, this is a guy, Hunter Biden, who, now, Garland, you pointed this out. This is Hunter Biden's a guy.
He was kicked out of the Navy?
Kicked out of the Navy.
For cocaine.
For like, I think very quickly, too. Wasn't he immediately kicked out of the Navy?
Yep. There's an article right here on NBC News. Joe Biden, son, kicked out of the Navy for cocaine. I think that's pretty clean. I mean, pretty clear, October 16th. But
October 16th of what year?
2014.
2014. So long before President Trump had anything to do with anything. And how quickly, just read the lead paragraph on that if you got the story up.
Vice President Joe Biden's son was booted from the Navy Reserve because he tested positive for drugs. It was revealed Thursday. He failed the test in 2013. He wasn't kicked out until February 14th of this year. He tested positive for cocaine.
Right. And then there's a story about him trying to buy crack.
Yeah, he was at a homeless encampment, and anybody can look it up. He was at a homeless encampment in L.A., apparently, trying to buy crack. He said that somebody put a gun in his face to rob him, and he came back the next day and bought crack from the same place.
Hey, mainstream media, you want to make this an issue? You want to talk about Joe Biden and his son? Let's do it. Let's do it.
But add
Bring
this.
it. Bring
Does
it. Come
that
on.
sound like
Come
somebody who should be on the board of directors? I'm not saying he should be in rehab, not on the board of directors of a gas. I don't think that gas company, Burisma, looked and like, hey, see the guy over there, the crackhead guy? Yeah, that's the guy we want. Give him $100,000 a month.
He's also, by the way, Joe Biden also wants to make Hunter Biden the ambassador to Kyrgyzstan. I don't know if you know that, but that's come out in the news recently.
Might not want to send him to that country.
I'm really serious. F you, mainstream media. If you want to make Hunter Biden the issue, great. Let's do it. Let's talk about nothing but Hunter Biden. Because you know what? I've heard a lot of talk about the Trump kids. I hear a lot of talk about Don Jr. Remember when Don Jr. was kicked out of the Navy for, no, that didn't happen.
No.
Okay, sure, he didn't join. But okay, that's a separate issue. But no, I'm serious. If the media, hey, media, you want to talk about Ukraine? Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about the coup in Ukraine. Let's talk about how you've lied. Let's talk about where people are better. Let's organize a junket. I'm going to go to Crimea, and I'm just going to go around to people and say, are you happy after the Maidan when you went with Russia?
Well, don't go to Ukraine because they'll eat you. Because it's the poorest country in the.
I will go to Ukraine. I'll go to Kyiv. And I will ask people the same question. I will ask them, what did you think of Poroshenko? Most unpopular. Hey, media, if you want to make Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Ukraine your central thesis, great, let's do it. Okay, joining us now to talk about this big UN Assembly stuff, and also there's a bunch of news. Our friend Caleb Maupin, he's a great reporter who's done stuff for RT. Hey, Caleb, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm in a bad mood, Caleb. I'm going to be honest with you.
We're hyped up here in D.C., man. We are hyped up. Hey, so Caleb, what do you
know? It's not you, Caleb. You're great. It's nobody who works in the show either.
No,
I don't want to. I love producer Shane, producer Cam, and engineer Andre. I'm going to have a group hug afterwards.
There's just kind of an ambient anger, an ambient, anxiousness floating around the room here. Look, apparently the UN General Assembly is coming up, and the U.S. is blocking visas. We covered some of the Russians today. A few days ago, they were blocking visas for the Iranians. What do you think of? Is this something new? Also, is this something that's happened in the past, or is this brand new?
Well, the story that we just have now is that 10 members of the Russian delegation were not able to get visas to attend the United Nations General Assembly. There's outrage about this from the Russian Foreign Ministry, and they're pointing out that this is a violation of the U.S.'s obligation under the UN treaty. And this is certainly not the first time this has happened. I remember a few years back when the Iranians appointed a new ambassador, Hamid Abu Talibi. The United States alleged he had participated in the embassy seizure, and so they did not allow Iran. They said, "Well, you got to pick another ambassador for the UN. We don't like that guy." But this is pretty big. I mean, 10 members of the Russian delegation. It's not exactly clear what reason is being given, and this is a violation. The UN treaty makes very clear the United States is obligated to accommodate all member states, sending their delegations to participate in UN activities. And the United States has not done that, and this is big.
I would think from the neocons' perspective, and Caleb, and that is, if you got too many diplomats running around, for God's sake, somebody might want diplomacy, and certainly the neocons aren't for that. I mean, I feel like this. I also think this too. Clearly, Trump has made it clear he would prefer better relations with Russia. It reminds me of some of the things that happened when Obama was in. And I think, what do you think about this? That these are the neocons, the people in the State Department, since they handle these visas, who I wouldn't even be surprised if not only Trump wasn't behind it, if he didn't know about it, if this isn't neocons within the bureaucracy doing their thing to thwart any possibility of diplomacy. What do you think of that, Caleb?
Well, it's very last minute, and it's pretty clear, as you've emphasized, there are different agendas within the Trump administration itself when it comes to Russia, within the government. And there's no question about that. We have, John Bolton, notoriously anti-Russian war hawk, who's now out, is no longer, the national security advisor. And yes, I think you could be onto something there, but we really don't know. It seems very last minute. You think we would know about this way in advance, not the day that the general debate is about to start. In just a few hours, we're going to have the general debate. We're going to hear from Trump. We're going to hear from other world leaders. We would think that we would have known about this beforehand. So this sounds like it was a very last-minute move.
Now, again, I'm sure the media is going to be, Garland, I'm sure they're going to be all over this and say that, although I don't agree with Russia on many things, oh, no, wait, the media is not going to do that at all. Then they're going to avoid this story like the plague and talk about this recycled Ukraine thing, which is not new in any way. Now, but Caleb, isn't this part of what's going? It seems to me. So we had a case where Russia denied visas for a couple of a senator or two recently, but that seemed like it was in retaliation for the U.S. denying. So really, don't we have a back and forth game here of who started it? Is that part of what's going on here?
It seems to be what's going on. It seems to be an escalation and a diplomatic game that is getting more intense. And I'm sure you can put it in context of many other global events. But it's certainly something that those of us who want to see peace in the world and cooperation between great powers are not happy to see. And it is also disappointing that despite the fact that this is the United States once again violating its obligations under the UN treaty, there's really not going to be any kind of penalty. I mean, there's not going to be any response. And it's weird because Trump seems to appeal to a lot of this old right-wing isolationist kind of John Birch society, get the UN out of the U.S., almost as if the United Nations is somehow a big burden on the United States. But yet we see the U.S. Playing this kind of game. And if you imagine if the UN headquarters was in Russia, and Russia had this kind of ability, it would give them lots more leverage in global affairs. So we're expecting when we hear from Trump that he will kind of continue to emphasize his anti-globalism themes in his remarks. We're also looking ahead to the fact that Bolsonaro will be giving his debut UN speech, the Brazilian president. And that will be quite interesting to see what he says to the United Nations, and that he so far has not made an appearance. We didn't see him yesterday at the climate summit. So people are wondering what we're going to hear in this coming morning. But it's kind of low on heads of state this year. Only 90 heads of state will be in town. Among them, though, is Rouhani, the Iranian president, and with all the tension that's been taking place in the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf and everything going on with oil tankers, we will be very interested to hear what the Iranian president has to say and to contrast it with what Trump will be saying.
Well, now it's interesting because I guess what was the G? I confuse these G's sometime, Garland. I think it was the G8 that happened recently, where Macron actually brought an Iranian foreign minister into the G8 summit. And that happened about a month ago, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Now, Macron has said, Caleb, that he's willing to get Rouhani and Trump together. Trump has deferred on that. But what's going on with that? Because it does seem like, and then I've heard multiple things about it. Seemed like the British flagged tanker that the
released by
Iranians had taken was released, and then I heard some different news. So what's going on with the axis here of Macron? What's Macron's role in this? Why is Macron trying to get Iran and Washington together?
Well, the European Union favors the Iran deal. There is no question about that. The forces that dominate the European Union think the Iran deal was a step forward. They think it was a way to get those sanctions lifted on Iran, start doing business with Iran. There's a lot of natural gas exploration going on in Iran, and a lot of European Union countries would like to invest in Iranian natural gas, and they see bringing Iran into the world market as a step forward. And the Obama administration, being closer to the European Union, being closer to Germany and France, part of that was their negotiation of the Iran deal. Trump's ripping up of the Iran deal very much is a break with Europe. And as much as it's an attack on Iran, it's also an attack on Europe in some ways. It's an attack on financial interests in Europe because there were a lot of European corporations in the energy markets that had a lot of money to gain from doing business with Iran, and now they no longer can do that. And I think that the divide between European capital and American capital when it comes to the Iran deal is pretty big. The other thing, though, that you have to keep in mind is before the recent incident where we saw that Saudi oil production facility destroyed with the drone attack, prior to that, you have to look and see that the oil price was slipping. It was going down. And there was a lot of concern about that because the shale drillers, the frackers in the United States, a lot of whom are big supporters of Donald Trump.
Now, watch your language, by the way, Caleb. You can't. Oh, you said frackers. Forgive me. Go ahead.
Yeah, frackers.
Okay.
But yeah, the fracking companies, a lot of them were big supporters of Trump, and they're having trouble paying back their loans. If you look at it, and people are talking about the shale bubble bursting, about how now, even with the oil price high, they're still having difficulty paying back their loans, and as a result, people fear that we could have some financial difficulties. And if that oil price slips, and if it drops, if it were to nosedive like it did under Obama, the financial results could be pretty catastrophic because they're drilling on credit. They're drilling on loans, and they're already having difficulty paying them back. People don't want to lend them money. We're having big problems on Wall Street with these fracking guys.
Well,
And by the way, not just the fracking guys, but some of them are women with kids, and those, of course, are the mother frackers.
The other thing I think here is
I'm sorry.
I think that what's going on in Ukraine is of consequence, and here's what I mean. So the new Prime Minister Zelensky he did a prisoner swap with Russia. He's working on another prisoner swap. There appears to be evidence that he wants I don't know if he wants détente or, just better relationships, whatever, with Russia. I think there were probably, the neocons are flipping out right now because you've got Macron, who, if you've been paying attention to Macron, he's been arguing for better relationship with Russia, even though some of the neocons, their position is, I want better relationship with Russia to rip them away from China, which isn't going to happen. That's still there. Don't you think one of the things that's going on here is kind of an inside battle where there are elements saying, let's be friendly with Russia to get them away from China, and then you've got other neocons inside saying, no matter what, we always have to be enemies with Russia. Do you think that inside fight's going on, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. One of Trump's first interviews he gave as a presidential candidate was with Bill O'Reilly. And in that interview, I remember him saying very clearly, you can't push Russia and China together. When Russia and China get together, that's a disaster. And what he was alluding to was the fact that the U.S.'s victory in the Cold War had a lot to do with the Sino-Soviet split. And that when Nixon went to China, when Henry Kissinger basically pushed for a U.S.-China alliance against the Soviet Union, which really didn't play out until the 70s. Keep in mind, the Sino-Soviet split was in 1961, but it wasn't until the 70s that China was geopolitically pivoting toward, aligning with the U.S. against the Soviet Union. But that had a lot to do with changing things geopolitically. The fact that, that China was able to align with the United States in Angola, in Ethiopia and places like that, that China was friendly with Pinochet, and the policies of the Gang of Four, where we saw China geopolitically aligning with the United States in the name of fighting what they called the Soviet social imperialists. that was a big game changer in the Cold War, and it had a big impact on international relations, and in a lot of developing countries where there was an armed conflict going on between pro-Soviet communist Marxist-Leninist forces and the United States-backed forces. To have China and its allies supporting the United States in places like Afghanistan, for example, in the 1980s, that was pretty big. I will say that I don't think such a thing is going to happen. First of all, because it's if you look at the Russian and U.S. and China, if you look at the Russian and Chinese leaders, they're quite friendly to each other. But the bond is not simply political; it's economic. Russia and China are economically tied. More so than ever, mainly because Russia at this point is a major energy-producing country, producing oil and natural gas. And China has become a manufacturing hub with so much industrial apparatus that needs oil and gas. So they almost are kind of a match made in heaven. I mean, China needs lots of energy, oil and gas. And Russia needs to sell oil and gas to somebody, and they're very, very close to each other geographically, and they're kind of getting along very well, and their bonds between them are bigger than ever, and they're economic bonds, not simply political bonds.
The great reporter Caleb Maupin is joining us this morning. We're talking about the UN General Assembly and other issues. Hey, Caleb, in the last couple minutes, do you think that this decision by the UK High Court this morning, that what Boris Johnson did was unlawful, do you think that's going to come up at all in the UN General Assembly? And the reason I say that, it seems to me like this is I don't think it's possible to overstate how big a deal this UK High Court decision is. Do you agree?
I think it's kind of amazing to see so much happening down to the wire and up to the general debate. I mean, we are just a few hours from the general debate, and we have this Russian visa story breaking. We have a UK High Court ruling. Down to the wire, we see this dramatic stuff happening. I'm sure it will be mentioned. I mean, Brexit is definitely on the minds of people in the United Nations and of the debates that are taking place. So I'm sure it will definitely come up. But it shows that there's some scrambling going on. There's a lot of last minute things that are happening. And a lot of pressure being put on world leaders. And as you alluded to the fact that Trump may not even be aware of this decision with the Russian visas, you get the impression that within many governments there are many different factions pushing.
Unfortunately, Caleb, we're just about out of time. Where can people go online to find more about your stuff?
You can visit my website, calebmaupin.com, CalebMaupin.com.
All right. Thanks a lot. That's Caleb Maupin. He's a journalist and political analyst. Coming up next, Ian Schilling, geopolitical analyst. You're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.